Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to call to order this informal session of a subsidiary body on implementation. Distinguished delegates, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I hope that whatever you are, you and your loved ones are safe and healthy. Those who have lost loved ones during the pandemic have our sincere and heartfelt condolences. I am aware that a number of countries are slowly opening up, but others are in the midst of high cases and deaths. We look forward to a day that life returns to normal and we all can meet again in person once again. I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge all those who we have been lost to COVID-19. Please join me for a moment of silence. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all and declare open this virtual informal session in preparation for the third meeting of the subsidiary body on implementation. I wish to thank the Executive Secretary and her staff for the wonderful preparations made for this meeting. I also would like to thank the Bureau of the Conference Parties for their support. This virtual informal session is intended to help maintain momentum in our preparations for the formal session meeting of SBI-3, as well for the 15th meeting of the Conference of Parties COP15 and the meetings of the parties to the protocols. We will also seek to advance our work related to the development of a post-2020 global biodiversity framework. 6 sessions of this meeting will take place beginning today, March 8, to Friday, March 12. As a reminder, we will not meet on Saturday, March 13. We will resume on Sunday, March 14. Our meetings will always start at 12 p.m. Universal Standard Time. On the 14th of March, Sunday, the following countries, the Bahamas, Canada, Cuba, Haiti, and the USA, will switch to daylight saving time. Hence for them and them only. The meeting will start at 8 a.m. and not at 7 a.m. as the rest of the days. For the rest of the world, the time will stay the same, 12 p.m. Universal Standard Time. Our primary focus at this meeting will be to provide an opportunity for statements by parties and observers on the issues on the agenda for SBI-3. As usual, I will count on your constructive engagement and cooperative spirit throughout the meeting. I look forward to working with you all in the coming days. Distinguished delegates, we are fortunate to have with us Dr. Abdallah Sedan, of Egypt who will address us on behalf of the COP14 presidency. Dr. Sedan, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Charlotta. Distinguished delegates, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. As the representative of the current president of the Conference of the Parties, Egypt, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the informal session for the third meeting of the subsidiary body on implementation, being held online today and in the coming days. Let me start by expressing my sympathy and solidarity with all of you, especially those who have lost loved ones or suffered hardship from the impacts of this extraordinary global pandemic. We have come together today for this virtual informal meeting to help maintain the momentum of the intergovernmental process on biodiversity, as well as to advance our preparations for the 15th meeting of the Conference of the Parties to the Convention to be held later this year. Your exchange of views and perspectives at this meeting will not only help accelerate discussions at the formal meeting of SBI-3, but will also help the world take an important step forward in the development of an ambitious and transformative post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Among the wide range of important agenda items to be considered at this informal meeting, allow me to highlight the key issue of resource mobilization. The level of ambition captured in the post-2020 framework must be as high as possible if we are truly transform our world and achieve the 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature. But such ambitious goals and targets naturally call for equally high ambition in defining and mobilizing the means for their implementation. Therefore, the challenge for the international community will be to match this substantive agenda with adequate means to implement it. That is, to answer the questions of how to mobilize the funding, the know-how, and other means to achieve our ambitious goals, and how to ensure effective cooperation at all levels and among all relevant actors. At this informal session, you will begin your work towards an important recommendation for the open-ended working group on post-2020 global biodiversity framework and for the Conference of the Parties. And I look forward to hearing your views on this vital issue. I cannot underscore enough the importance of the discussions to be held at meetings such as this informal session. The world's biodiversity is declining at an unprecedented rate, and we, as a global community, must maximize every available opportunity to further biodiversity conservation and protection, and to achieve the 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature. I would like to thank the SBI Chair, Charlotta, and all members of the SBI Bureau for their leadership in preparing for this informal session. SBI-3 has a broad and ambitious agenda, but I am confident that under the guidance from the Chair and the Bureau, this informal session will help carry forward the important work of the Convention and its protocols. Distinguished delegates, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, your expertise and experience in implementing the Convention in your respective countries to date are invaluable. Therefore, I am confident This meeting will stimulate an open sharing of thoughts and ideas on these subjects as we advance towards the formal meeting of SBI-3 and, of course, the COP15, where we aim to adopt a global biodiversity framework for the post-2020 period. I look forward to hearing your productive interactions and inspiring discussions. I thank you.
Thank you, Hamdallah. And may I offer my sincere thanks for the excellent leadership and guidance the government of Egypt have provided while serving as a COP14 presidency.
Thank you.
I would now like to invite Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity, Ms. Elizabeth Maruma Mrema, to deliver her remarks to the subsidiary body on implementation. Ms. Maruma Mrema, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Hope you can hear me.
Loud and clear.
Thank you, Madam Chair, delegates, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I wish to welcome you all to this virtual informal session in preparation of the third meeting of the subsidiary body on implementation, or SBI-3, to the Convention on Biological Diversity. Together with my colleagues at the Secretariat, I am honored to support you as you take another step on the road to the 15th meeting of the Conference of the Parties, COP15, and the adoption later this year of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Madam Chair, I would like to take this opportunity to sincerely thank you and the Bureau for your excellent leadership in preparing for this informal session. Fortunately, where some people see obstacles, you see opportunities, and I'm confident that the SBI will advance its work under your guidance. I will equally also like to sincerely thank the Government of Canada, our host country, as well as the Government of the United Kingdom for their generous financial support, which has enabled us to address the additional costs incurred for our virtual meetings, including the services of our excellent team of interpreters, as well as for the training sessions held last week. I'm confident that all participants share my appreciation for your unwavering support, which will help us maintain momentum towards COP15 and further the development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. The number of participants assembled for this meeting are impressive. More than 1,830 participants have been registered, representing 130 countries and many organizations. I trust that all, if not majority of them, have been able to join us virtually, and thus looking forward for their active participation, which is essential for engaging and advancing equally the three objectives of the convention and those of its protocol without leaving anyone behind. Likewise, it is my pleasure to note that this meeting begins on an International Women's Day, the theme of which women in leadership, achieving an equal future in a COVID-19 world. Without the full and effective engagement of women and girls, with full support and recognition, of course, by men in processes related to biodiversity, we cannot cope to achieve the 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature. In recognition of this day, we are privileged and honored to have a keynote speaker, Ms. Isabel Texeira, who will provide us with an opening address on the importance of women leadership in our efforts to protect biodiversity. Dear participants, hopefully Many of you were able to attend the information session webinars we had organized earlier on in the year in preparation for this informal meeting. The webinars presented extensive information on a range of important topics that will have a major impact on the work of the convention and its protocols. The complementary implementation of the convention and its protocols is important to ensure that the benefits are unlocked and flow to all stakeholders, thus creating enabling environment for the conservation and sustainable utilization. As you may recall, the subsidiary body of implementation was established with an objective to review progress in the implementation of the convention and its protocols, equally to assess improvements in support of the implementation and appraise advancement in the achievements of targets established under the convention. The third session of the SBI will therefore provide us with an opportunity to move ahead on these important undertakings, and I look forward to hearing your views on these matters. Briefly, Madam Chair, allow me to briefly highlight the substantive agenda items before us today and in the coming days. First, under item 3, we will review progress in the implementation of the strategic plan for biodiversity 2011 to 2020 and achievements of the Aichi biodiversity targets, taking into account the multi-year program of work of the Conference of the Parties up to 2020, and make recommendations which will feed to our COP15. This item will include a review of implementation of the 2015 to 2020 Global Plan of Action on Gender, as this assessment has contributed to the development of the draft outline of the post-2020 Gender Plan of Action presented for consideration under Agenda Item 5. Second, we will also review an analysis and synthesis of information for the assessment and review of the effectiveness of the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety, as well as the final evaluation of the strategic plan of the Cartagena Protocol for the period 2011-2020. The recommendations will then be submitted to the Conference of the Parties, serving as the meeting of the parties to the Cartagena Protocol, or COP-MOP, for consideration at its 10th meeting. This process will help the meeting of the parties direct its policy in support of the areas where implementation needs strengthening. Thirdly, further, your inputs will contribute to the development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework as prepared by the open-ended working group and complement it with elements related to the means to support and review implementation, including related to the Cartagena and Nagoya protocols and the working group on Article 8J dealing with traditional knowledge. This item will also enable the SBI to review the post-2020 implementation plan for the Cartagena Protocol and its post-2020 capacity building action plan. In addition, this plan is complementary to and anchored to in the post-2020 framework and demonstrates the continued commitment in ensuring the conservation and sustainable utilization of biodiversity, taking into account risks to human health. There will equally be an opportunity to discuss post-2020 gender and communication plans. Fourthly, resource mobilization and financial mechanisms issues are both complex and challenging, as well as essential to reaching our biodiversity goals, and our President, Dr. Zedan, alluded to it. With regards to resource mobilization, SBI will review the outputs of the panel of experts on resource mobilization, including their contribution towards the resource mobilization component of the post-2020 framework, and begin our work towards the recommendation for the open-ended working group and later to the Conference of the Parties. With respect to the financial mechanism, we will consider a preliminary report of the Council of the Global Environmental Facility, or GEF, and begin our work towards recommendations to the Conference of the Parties and to the Conference of the Parties meeting serving as the meeting of the parties to both Cartagena and Nagoya protocols regarding their guidance to the GEF on a number of important issues. Fifthly, under our agenda item 7 on capacity building, technical and scientific cooperation, technology transfer, knowledge management, and communication, our discussion will consider many key issues relating to these matters. And these will include a draft long-term strategic framework for capacity building beyond 2020, proposals to strengthen technical and scientific cooperation, and for an inclusive process to review such programs. We will equally seek to ensure an effective approach to capacity building under the Nagoya Protocol consistent with the post-2020 framework. Likewise, we will consider the draft elements of the knowledge management component of the post-2020 framework and possible elements of the post-2020 work program for clearinghouse mechanism. Sixth, there will be an opportunity to discuss options for enhancing mechanisms for reporting, assessment, and review, as well as issues related to national planning with a view to strengthening implementation of the convention. Seventh, under agenda item 10, we will review information on the experience of holding concurrent meetings and make recommendations for consideration at the next COP15, and as appropriate, the COP MOP to the Cartagena Protocol at its 10th meeting, as well as the COP MOP to the Nagoya Protocol at its 4th meeting. Eighth, we will discuss strategies to help accelerate and guide mainstreaming of biodiversity within and across sectors and other strategic actions to enhance implementations, and particularly looking into economic sectors. Under this agenda item 11, we will consider progress report on the work of the Informal Advisory Group on mainstreaming of biodiversity. And will also include a discussion on draft long-term approach to mainstreaming and how to further leverage the engagement of subnational and local governments in the implementation of the convention, the protocols, as well as to the post-2020 framework, building on the outcomes of the Edinburgh process. Ninth, key provisions of the Nagoya Protocol. And this is specifically the implementation of the protocol, which is essential for the impactful implementation of the other two objectives of the convention. There are key provisions of the Nagoya Protocol that are important for ensuring flow of benefits to all stakeholders. Specifically, you will be invited to provide your views and perspectives on the protocol's key provisions with the aim to further unlock its impactful implementation. We will equally consider a synthesis of information provided by the parties and other governments on how specialized international access and benefit sharing instruments are addressed in their domestic measures, and hear their views on the study on specific cases of genetic resources and traditional knowledge that occur in transboundary situations. We will equally consider a possible global multilateral benefit sharing mechanism and take steps towards making a recommendation to the 4th meeting of the Nagoya Protocol. Finally and lastly, we must also address some of the important administrative and budgetary questions. And under item 14, the Secretariat will provide you with an update on the activities of the Secretariats and the status of the trust funds administered by the Convention and the protocols. And in closing, or before I close, I would like to express once again my sincere appreciation to my team of the Secretariat staff whose diligence and dedication has brought us this far, that we are meeting today with all groundwork preparations done and accomplished. To them all, my sincere appreciation. They have indeed gone an extra mile to support you all and to support this and other meetings, including the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework process. This past year has been very trying and challenging, but that did not slow our efforts to support you and the process in every way possible. I look forward to your interventions on these agenda items, and with the support of the Secretariat and guidance of the SBI Chair and the COP Bureau, this meeting will provide the necessary support for our formal discussions at the subsidiary body of implementation, the third session, leading us on the path to the adoption of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. I wish you all a successful meeting, and thank you, Madam Chair, and everybody for your attention. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Ms. Murema, for your warm welcome and for providing a comprehensive overview of the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. Also, I would like to reiterate my congratulations to you and your team for your hard work in preparing for this meeting. I look forward to your continued support in facilitating this meeting. Thank you so much. Distinguished delegates, as you know, today is International Women's Day. I have therefore invited Ms. Isabella Teixeira, co-chair of International Resource Panel and senior fellow at Brazilian Center for International Relations, to join us to deliver some remarks. A career public servant, she was Brazil's Minister of Environment from 2010 to 2016 and was the host of Rio Plus 20, as many of you may remember. In 2013, she received UNEP Champion of the Earth Award for Policy Leadership. I'm honored to welcome Ms. Isabella Teixeira to provide remarks to a subsidiary body on implementation on the occasion of International Women's Day. Ms. Isabella Teixeira, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good morning from Brazil. I'm very honored to have the opportunity to join you, my friends, in this, I think that is fantastic day, okay? We are really, really great as women, and we know that to make the difference in a positive way, not only in our countries, but around the world. So I'd like first to thank you, Madam Elizabeth Mema. Nice to see you again, my dear friend, for the invitation to join the meeting, particularly today. And also you, Madam Chair, and also CBD staffs to invite me. You know that unfortunately I don't have much time, but I'm really so honored to have the opportunity to join you today. So it's critical to discuss the relevance of humans' leadership to achieve the Convention's objectives, particularly considering the strategic discussion of the development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and the deepening inequalities that the COVID pandemic has brought to the fore. The COVID-19 crisis has brought the debate about the future to the present. Okay, we're not more discussing the future, we're discussing today. It's absolutely important that you can highlight this. We need to consider the opportunities available for a new future and not only look for the new normal or to reestablish the status quo. We need to ensure that we have a strong and inclusive leadership that reflects the diverse voice and perspectives to bring everyone on board to build a better relationship between humankind and nature. The International Resource Panel, REP, recognize the importance of advancing humans' leadership, enabling equitable decision-making, and the critical necessity of ensuring equal access to natural resources. The IRP has been working based on robust and powerful scientific evidence to clarify the importance of natural resource management approach to acknowledge, understand, and address the direct and indirect drivers of biodiversity loss for climate, nature, and for socially and just economic and social development. Resource management is the link between sustainable and inclusive prosperity and the survival/protection of the natural world. It means turning the underlying drivers on biodiversity loss into opportunities to enable the active protection, restoration, and regeneration of biodiversity as a key driver for inclusive socio-economic and sustainable development. This means ensuring that women and girls can contribute to and benefit equally from actions to protect biodiversity and promote sustainable development. In this context, of the international co-chair think piece that is coming, okay, addressing leaders putting into action the new global biodiversity agreement, it seems relevant to emphasize that biodiversity supports humanity in all it needs, yet we neglect its value. It's clear that biodiversity is also critical for health. It's essential in 2021 to seize the political momentum and focus global biodiversity governance on the drivers of biodiversity loss. And to address this, we must take a natural resource management approach considering 4 principles. Know your real impact, value chain transparency. Plan together, integrate landscape planning. Grow with nature, nature-based solutions and circular solutions, and also value nature, nature benefits. This approach can only succeed with the full and effective engagement of human and girls. We cannot expect that continuing to leave the heaviest burdens and the smallest share of benefits to 1/2 of the population will lead to better results for biodiversity or human well-being. The critical role of women and girls in the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity must be clearly reflected in the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Furthermore, to halt biodiversity loss and, in so doing, to contribute to a green and inclusive recovery, the new gender plan of action should, or must, in my opinion, okay, play an important political role at the global and local levels. The new gender plan of action provides an opportunity to establish a common set of goals, objectives, and actions to address the fundamental inequalities in the ways that you have conducted the business of biodiversity and the biodiversity protection. This includes addressing the gaps in leaderships where women need to be playing a more central role in decision-making at all levels of biodiversity governance. Diversity of voice also means women from indigenous and local communities, from rural areas and from different racial and ethnic groups, all need to have a voice in charting a new course forward. Finally, we cannot put aside the requirements of implementation of a new gender plan of action. We must discuss the key action arrangements now. Don't postpone, please, the debate about the tools and mechanisms and the political arrangement to bring people on board. The COVID crisis has made it all too clear. It's essential to clarify our co-responsibility to act today because there is no time to postpone any decision to halt the biodiversity loss. It's time to be ambitious, okay, but also it's time to ensure women can take the place at the table. It is the urgence of the present. It's the urgence of the future. Thank you very much for this opportunity to join you. I'm absolutely confident that we'll have a well-succeeded COP, and more than this, we have new perspectives, powerful perspectives to address, to halt biodiversity loss, but more also to bring people together in the safe new future. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'd like to thank also the CVD staff especially Madam Tanya, and thank you really the opportunity to share some inputs from International Resource Panel. Good day for us, good year for us, but let's really work hard to bring really innovative ways and to bring people not only on board with co-responsibility and co-ambition. Thank you, and I hope that we from Brazil can join you soon in better days.
Thank you, Ms. Isabella Tejera, for your inspiring and encouraging remarks. On behalf of SBI, let me thank you for reminding us of the importance ensuring that women and girls can contribute to and benefit equally from actions to protect biodiversity and promote sustainable development. And it is time to be ambitious, and it is time to ensure that women can take their place at the table. Thank you so much. So, ladies and gentlemen, at our usual formal meetings with SBI, we will now turn to the adoption of agenda and the organization of work. However, since this is an informal session in preparation for SBI-3, I will not submit the provisional agenda for adoption at this stage. Instead, I propose that we simply use the issue on the provisional agenda for SBI-3 to guide our discussions. As for the organizational work for this session, I refer you to the scenario note prepared for this informal session, which contains detailed information on how we will proceed. Before we begin, I would like to highlight a few key points. This informal session is intended to maintain momentum and advance our preparations for SBI-3 and COP15. Our primary focus will be hearing interventions on the pre-session documents for the agenda items of SBI-3. I anticipate that parties and observers will provide interventions that are similar in content to those at the first reading at our formal meetings of SBI. Participants are encouraged to focus the interventions on the elements of the draft recommendations set out in the pre-session documents. All sessions will be recorded, and all written submissions provided before the end of each agenda item will be posted online. Participants are strongly encouraged to provide written submissions to the Secretariat prior to each agenda item, so that these can be made available to the interpreters and facilitate interpretation. Participants may also submit pre-recorded statements to the Secretariat as backup in case of unforeseeable connection problems during the informal meeting. All requests for the floor by parties will be heard for each agenda item during this informal session. Statements by stakeholder groups will also be heard, as well as other observers at times allow. Each agenda item will start with regional and group statements after the introduction of the item by the Secretariat. However, there will be no regional or group statement during the opening or closing sessions of the informal meeting. And as usual, statements on each agenda item from parties and observers will follow a previous practice of being limited to 5 minutes on behalf of a region, group, 3 minutes for individual interventions. In the interest of time and to allow a greater number of observers to speak, may I encourage you not to repeat what others have already stated, not to thank the chair, secretariat for their work, and I will thank the executive secretary and her team on your behalf. And not repeat, for example, full title, document number, as this would already have been specified through the Secretariat introduction of agenda item. I also urge you to speak slowly so that the interpreters are able to translate in all the languages. Finally, I would like to remind participants that there will be no negotiations at this session, no formal substantive outcomes, decisions or conference room papers. However, there is an expectation that when the formal SBI-3 meeting is held, to increase efficiency, parties may refer to their statement at this informal session and make additions if so needed. As I have already said, all statements delivered during this informal session will be recorded and made public on the CPD website. The written submissions will be made available on the CPD website unless the party concerned decides otherwise. Please also see the meeting webpage for the online submission system. Before we begin, I would also like to reiterate that as this is an informal session of SBI, parties have a right to change or add to their views during the formal session of SBI. And therefore, also in the interest of time, I would encourage you not to add this disclaimer to your statement. Please consider it as spoken through my intervention right now. The Secretariat will prepare a procedure report as per usual practice. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would also like to say a few words about the consideration of agenda items. The scenario note lays out the proposed order and timing we will follow for taking up agenda items, and every attempt will be made to cover all these agenda items during the informal meeting. However, this is dependent on the number of requests for the floor per agenda item. And as stated in the scenario note, it's proposed not to open agenda item 8 during this informal session. The Bern 2 consultations were recently concluded, and the outcomes of this consultation should be included in the pre-session documents for SBI-3. And there are also many other processes that are ongoing that would benefit from being included in the pre-session document. And therefore we will take up this item for the first time at the formal meeting of SBI-3. We would like to take up agenda items related to post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework as a package, as well as attempt to address agenda items related to protocols. And it's therefore proposed that agenda item 10 will be taken up at the end of our meeting. And for agenda item 14, the Secretariat will provide an update on administrative matters, but there's no expectation of statements from parties and observers. So finally, let me also say a few additional words about the treatment of agenda item 5. I would again draw your attention to a scenario note, which includes helpful information on the linkages between the framework and other issues for SBI, as well as a reminder that the co-chairs of the open-ended working group have identified a set of questions which they are seeking inputs from the SBI. Taking all this into account, the agenda item 5 will be organized as follows. First round of intervention on the implementation plan for the Cartagena protocol and the capacity building action plan for the protocol. The co-chairs of a working group will then introduce the annex contained in document CBD/SBI/FLI/4. And this introduction will help delegations consider the questions contained in the annex during their statement under the agenda items 6, 7, 9, and 11. We'll then adjourn our consideration of agenda item 5. After agenda item 6, 7, 9, and 11 have been completed, agenda item 5 will be reopened again for a second round of comments on issues not yet covered. When agenda item 5 is reopened, the co-leads of a recently convened consultation workshop on biodiversity-related convention on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework Bern 2 will also provide a short briefing of outcomes of that meeting. And before we begin, I would like to invite the Secretariat to provide some information on the organizational work for these sessions, followed by some logistical information on the use of our online meeting system. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, good afternoon, and good day, everyone. Dear participants, as you have been informed through the scenario note, this meeting will include statements equivalent to the first reading at a physical meeting. All statements will be recorded, and statements submitted in writing will be posted online unless the Secretariat is informed otherwise. The CBD Secretariat has developed an online application that allows countries and organizations to upload their statements to the meeting page. It is highly recommended that participants use this tool instead of emailing their statements, as it helps streamline the meeting process and facilitates the work of the interpreters. We will still, however, monitor the email address statements@cbd.int. Uploading instructions were included in your priority pass email, along with the dedicated link, which leads you directly to the upload page. A 6-minute instructional video explaining both how to upload statements and how our online conference system works is being played during the break, as well as just before we convene each morning. Please be sure to include the name of your country, organization, and the agenda item on the first page of the statement that is uploaded. Participants are encouraged to allow their statements to be posted on the meeting page. Please note that statements will be posted online on the meeting page once they have been delivered by the respective parties and registered observers, subject to the agreement of the parties and observers concerned. The website will be updated accordingly each day. However, once the agenda item is completed, in the case that not all statements of observers are presented orally because of lack of time, those statements that have been provided in good time will be posted, again, subject to the agreement of the observer concerned. All sessions will last 3 hours per day and will be held from 1200 to 1500 Universal Time, that is 7 to 10 a.m. Montreal time, except on Sunday. On Sunday, it will be 8 to 11 Montreal time, with a 15-minute break approximately midway through each session. On the last day, Sunday, we will maintain the same start time at 1200 UTC, which will be 1 hour later in Montreal. All requests for the floor by regional groups and parties will be heard for each agenda item during the online informal meeting. If any party encounters connectivity issues that prevent them from making their statement, they should contact the Secretariat to make alternative arrangements. Statements by major groups will also be heard, as well as other observers as time allows. Each agenda item will start with regional and group statements after the introduction of the item by the Secretariat. However, there will be no regional or group statements during the opening or closing sessions of the informal meeting. As usual, statements on each agenda item from parties and observers will follow previous approach and be limited to 5 minutes on behalf of the region or group and 3 minutes for individual interventions. Together with the chair of the subsidiary body on implementation, the Secretariat will prepare a short procedural report on the informal session, noting the parties and observers making interventions. The list of all pre-registered participants is available online at the link you can see on the screen. When the chair invites for intervention, if you wish to speak, please press the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen, which will turn yellow. Your request will be entered in the queue list visible to the chair. When the chair gives you the floor, the moderator will activate your microphone. The status bar will turn red on your computer, and you may start to speak immediately. If the chair gives you the floor to speak and you have not raised your hand, please press the raise hand button so the moderator can see you on the list and activate your microphone. If any party encounters connectivity issues, as I've already said, please contact the Secretariat and we will make alternative arrangements for you. We would also like to remind participants that the chat box is for brief communication and therefore to keep your remarks here short. The time for statements, as I said, is limited to 3 minutes for parties, 5 minutes for regional groups. A clock is provided for you on the screen to help you to manage your time. But please do not speed up your reading, as it will be challenging for the interpreters to follow you. Finally, please note that towards the end, mid-session, the chair will announce a 15-minute break. There is no need to log off during this time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. And we will now begin our consideration of our first substantive agenda item, and it is agenda item 3. And I will now first request Secretariat to introduce the documents related to agenda item 3 on review of progress in the implementation of a convention and a strategic plan for biodiversity. So, Secretariat, you have the floor again.
Thank you, Chair. In Decision 10/2, the Conference of the Parties decided that at its future meetings, it would review progress in the implementation of the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011 to 2020 and requested the Executive Secretary to prepare an analysis/synthesis of national, regional, and other actions, including targets as appropriate, established in accordance with the strategic plan to enable the Conference of the Parties to assess the contribution of such national and regional targets to the global targets. In response to this decision and related subsequent decisions, the Conference of the Parties at each of its meetings since COP10 has reviewed progress in the implementation of the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011 to 2020 on the basis of, among other things, the national reports and national biodiversity strategies and action plans. Further, in Decision 14/18, the Conference of the Parties requested the Executive Secretary to undertake a review of the implementation of the 2015 to 2020 Gender Plan of Action in order to identify gaps, best practices, and lessons learned. In light of these decisions, the Secretariat has prepared document CBD/SBI/3/2, Review of Progress in the Implementation of the Convention and the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011 to 2020. This document contains a suggested recommendation for the consideration of the subsidiary body. This document is also supported by 4 addenda. CBD/SBI/3/2 Add 1, Update on Progress in Revising/Updating and Implementing National Biodiversity Strategies and Action Plans, including national targets. CBD/SBI/3/2 Add 2, Analysis of the contribution of targets established by parties and progress towards the Aichi biodiversity targets. CBD/SBI/3/2 Add 3, Review of implementation of the 2015 to 2020 Gender Plan of Action, and CBD/SBI/3/2 Add 4, Progress towards Aichi Biodiversity Target 18 on traditional knowledge and customary sustainable use of biodiversity. Documents Add 1 and Add 2 were previously made available for peer review. The comments received were taken into account in the finalization of the documents. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. And I would now like to open the floor for interventions. And before I begin, I would like to welcome our dedicated interpreters who work so hard to ensure that we understand one another. To assist them in their important work, I ask you to keep your interventions to the time limit while speaking slowly and clearly. So I will now open the floor to interventions, starting with regional groups, followed by parties, non-parties, and observers. And I will start with statements for regions, and for African region, I think the Democratic Republic of Congo. If you raise your hand, you have the floor.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The Democratic Republic of Congo is speaking on behalf of the African Group on Agenda Item 3 of SBI-3. First and foremost, Madam Chair, Africa considers this agenda item to be important for the simple reason speaker has disappeared.
Speaker, has we lost the speaker?
Yeah, maybe we can go on to the next and come back. I see that they put their hands up again. Maybe they can.
Yes. Okay, you're welcome back. Okay, go ahead, Congo.
Je continue.
Continue. Thank you, Madam Chair. For Africa, in particular, the majority of the countries, over 60%, adopted revised NBSAPs in 2016 and 2017. Many of the actions adopted were planned to span 10 years, corresponding to the strategic plan cycle 2011-2020. The implementation of numerous actions has just begun, and the progress is currently slow. In certain cases, financial resources are in the process of being mobilized for the adopted actions. Certain countries have taken into consideration the late adoption of their NBSAP and the delayed launch of many actions. Therefore, they have set their deadlines beyond 2020. For example, some people have taken 2022, 2025, and even 2030 as the deadline. On the basis of a self-assessment of progress achieved by the countries in implementing their NBSAPs, as reported in the 6th national reports, for approximately 3% of all the national targets, and there are certainly more than 1,000 if we take 20 national targets per country, the progress has exceeded expectations. 31% of the targets are on track to be met, and for the remaining targets, approximately 64%, the progress has been slow, or there has been no significant progress, or there are no data available. For Africa, one of the reasons for this limited progress lies in the fact that the adoption of the NBSAPs between 2015 and 2016 left very little time before the preparation of the 6th national reports was to begin. In any event, we believe that an in-depth analysis should have been conducted to detect, identify, and describe the deep-seated reasons, both evident and indirect, for this limited progress, and to learn the appropriate lessons for the post-2020 global framework. In this regard, the lessons learned from implementing the strategic plan 2011-2020, as reported in the GBO 5, will be of relevance here. Regarding the issue of increasing the level of ambition of the national commitments, without opposing it, we nonetheless believe it important to specify that the ambitions should remain commensurate with the situation and needs of the countries and regions. Madam Chair, on the basis of the aforementioned points, Africa is requesting the following. For the post-2020 global framework, there should be advanced provision of a mechanism for an in-depth review of its implementation by an independent body. To note, in the draft recommendation, the 8 lessons learned from the GBO5 in the section on lessons learned from implementation of the strategic plan for biodiversity 2011-2020 should be incorporated. That all the other direct and indirect drivers of biodiversity loss that have not been identified at all or insufficiently so in the new framework be presented and taken into account, in particular, armed conflicts and bushfires. The issue of desertification and drought should also be addressed in the new post-2020 global framework. The post-2020 global framework should contain provisions to support actions that began or were planned by the countries before 2020 in their NBSAPs. The post-2020 global framework should promote synergy with other processes underway in which several stakeholders are participating, for example, climate change and SDG implementation. Also, eligible countries should be provided with necessary financial support for the implementation of the post-2020 global framework, and the procedures for accessing funding should be eased. And I'm speaking of accessing funding to certain existing financial mechanisms. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. The Democratic Republic of Congo, speaking on behalf of the African region. And I will continue with Georgia, speaking on behalf of CEE region. Georgia, you have the floor. Georgia, please go ahead. You have the floor.
Hello?
I can hear you very well.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, on behalf of the Central and Eastern European region, I would like to thank for preparation of the documents for this meeting. We consider that review of progress in implementation of the Convention and the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011-2020 is important not only for assessment of the progress, but to identify the issues and lessons learned which would contribute to the process of development of the post-2020 biodiversity framework. First of all, we would like to congratulate the countries with their considerable efforts for implementation of the strategic plan, but also with the regret note that the national and regional targets which have been adopted do not collectively add up to the level of the ambition set out in the Aichi biodiversity targets. Moreover, only a bit more than a third of national targets were on track to be met, and only 3% were exceeded. Success rate is even lower concerning to those targets that are corresponding to the Aichi biodiversity targets. The document suggests the lessons learned from the process of implementation of the strategic plan, which we think are important to consider for the post-2020 process. Here we would like to highlight the whole of government approach and the need for partnerships with all stakeholders. But we would also like to stress the importance of involving all stakeholders from the very initial stage of MBSAP development, rather than the implementation stage. Permanent communication among the stakeholders during the implementation phase is also important to ensure that all necessary information is shared. We also consider that the MBSAP should have a simple and user-friendly structure with smart and well-articulated actions instead of complex actions difficult to implement. One of the lessons learned from the process of implementation is that enhancing regional cooperation boosts this project. For example, contribution to the implementation of the strategic plan, amongst other actions, can also be attributed to the establishment and work of the Biodiversity Task Force of the Southeast Europe that stimulates sub-regional cooperation and enables progress towards international biodiversity commitments. The document also mentions the need to reduce the time lags in planning to ensure that implementation is not delayed. In many countries, this is often linked to delayed procedures in accessing the necessary funding. In addition, we would also like to note the Global Strategy for Plant Conservation as the important document contributing to the implementation of the strategic plan and achievement of the Aichi biodiversity targets. Finally, since they were not mentioned in the documents, Georgia would also like to thank the German Corporation for International Cooperation, GIZ, for kind support in updating and implementation of the 2014-2020 MBSEP and the Biodiversity Finance Initiative, BioFin, for substantial support through assessing the biodiversity expenditures and the financial needs, as well as development and implementation of the Biodiversity Finance Plan. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Georgia, speaking on behalf of CE region. We now continue with Argentina, speaking on behalf of GRULAC region. Argentina, you have the floor.
Dear colleagues, this statement is made on behalf of GRULAC. Madam Chair, the review of progress in the implementation of the Convention and the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011-2020 is the starting point to consider the challenges in the development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, taking also into account science-based evidence and the urgency of halting biodiversity loss. These results remind us that there are many lessons learned and challenges to deal with while delivering the post-2020 framework to guide us to accomplish the three objectives of the Convention. To respond to the magnitude of the challenge of biodiversity loss, we must make sure that the three objectives are implemented in a balanced manner, and we must use traditional knowledge and science-based evidence in the decision-making process. The scientific evidence is clear. We do not have much time to amend our relationship with nature for us and the generations to come. Building a more sustainable relationship with nature also relies on recognizing the essential role of biodiversity for eradicating poverty and promoting the Sustainable Development Goals. In this sense, GRULAC takes note of the analysis contained in the note prepared by the Secretariat and expresses deep concern regarding the fact that the level of ambition of the Aichi biodiversity targets was not reached collectively by CBD parties during the last decade. As a region, we have been committed to the achievement of previous strategic frameworks and have made significant efforts to reflect the Aichi biodiversity targets within our national biodiversity strategies and action plans. In this sense, we reaffirm our commitment to strengthen the efforts to achieve the three objectives of the Convention through a new global biodiversity framework that should be clear, ambitious, balanced, realistic, and time-bounded. GRULAC parties would like to underline that we have also struggled to gather the means of implementations needed for the full achievement of the Aichi targets and our national strategies. In particular, we regret that there has not been enough provision of financial resources, capacity building, and technology transfer, in line with Article 20 of the Convention and the principles enshrined in the Rio de Janeiro Declaration on Environment and Development, adopted in 1992, to fully implement the Aichi biodiversity targets in our region. In our view, this is one of the main amendments that need to be made if we want new biodiversity strategies commensurate with the level of ambition of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, in order to halt biodiversity loss and achieve the vision of living in harmony with nature. The lessons learned reaffirm our commitment to conserve and sustainably use biological diversity for the benefit of present and future generations, and highlight the importance of building an inclusive post-2020 framework. Additionally, we must deliver innovative paths and robust communication strategies. In relation to development cooperation, we should focus on expanded long-term strategic cooperation and commitment resources through modalities adapted to the national context to address the specific capacity gaps of developing countries. The region will take into consideration the conclusions and the lessons learned from this review to design the goals and targets of the post-2020 process. Nonetheless, Madam Chair, we wish to highlight that we are committed to increase our ambition as appropriate and continue making our contribution to achieve our goals and targets for biodiversity in the following decade. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Argentina, on behalf of the GRULAC region. And finally, for the regions, I give the floor to Portugal, speaking on behalf of EU and its member states. Portugal, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the European Union and its member states. The EU and its member states are of the position that SBI should express great concerns that, unfortunately, progress in the implementation of the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011-2020 has not been sufficient to achieve the Aichi biodiversity targets. We are particularly concerned about the insufficient mainstreaming of biodiversity across sectors and the lack of realizing synergies. Additionally, the EU and its member states notes with deep concern that the national targets and commitments set by parties through their national biodiversity strategies and action plans are collectively not commensurate with the level of ambition set out in the Aichi biodiversity targets, and that while there has been encouraging progress towards these targets, progress on the whole has been limited. The EU and its member states believe that there is a need to learn from the review of the implementation of the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011-2020. Therefore, recommendations and lessons learned should be taken into account when preparing the post-2020 GBF. Even though the efforts made by parties to reflect indigenous peoples and local communities, traditional knowledge, customary sustainable use, and gender issues in their national biodiversity strategic and action plans, the EU and its member state notes with deep concern that these important issues still need to be better reflected in the implementation of the Convention, and more efforts are needed to guarantee this. We welcome the best practices identified in the implementation of the Gender Plan of Action. However, the 2015-2020 Gender Plan of Action has not been fully implemented, and the gender is not adequately reflected in the implementation of the Convention or in national biodiversity strategies and action plans. Therefore, we think that there is still room for improvement, and a new plan of action, along with the measurable targets and appropriate indicators, will be needed to support the implementation of a gender-responsive post-2020 global biodiversity. Therefore, the EU and its member states urge parties to significantly accelerate their efforts to implement the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011-2020 in anticipation of the post-2020 GBF to be adopted at COP15. Finally, the EU and its member states think that the SBI should invite parties to update their national biodiversity strategies and action plans based on lessons learned and best practices contained in the Global Biodiversity Outlooks 4 and 5, Local Biodiversity Outlook 2, as well as in the review of the implementation of the 2015-2020 Gender Action Plan of Action, in the view of aligning them with upcoming post-20 Global Biodiversity Framework as appropriate. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Portugal, speaking on behalf of EU and its member states. So, we will now move to interventions from parties. Just to remind you, if you wish to speak, please press the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen, which will turn yellow. Your request will be entered in the queue list. When I give you the floor, the microphone will be activated, the status bar will turn red on your computer, and you may start to speak immediately. And I see many asking for the floor, so I will take the first intervention from Ethiopia, followed by New Zealand and Brazil. Ethiopia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Thank
ahead.
you. Thank you. Ethiopia supports a statement made by Democratic Republic of Congo on behalf of the African group. Ethiopia believes that NVSAPs are the principal instruments for implementing the convention at national levels, thus has to be updated and function properly in the coming decades. Therefore, Ethiopia believes that when designing post-2020 biodiversity framework, there should be 1. Effective monitoring and evaluation system of the commitments set by parties. 2. Recognition and improvement of the roles of IPLCs and the customary sustainable use and gender plan of action need to be addressed. 3. Resource mobilization tools and mechanisms are needed at national and international levels for effective implementation of NVSAPs. 4. Designing practical targets, indicators, and baseline data, if possible, have to be established during NVSAP strategic development. The fifth and last, biodiversity mainstreaming into sectorial and cross-sectorial plans, programs, strategies, and policies, and their implementation need adequate support from high-level segment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ethiopia. I'll now give the floor to New Zealand, followed by Brazil and Indonesia. New Zealand, you have the floor.
Good morning and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Chair. New Zealand supports the draft recommendations put forward under this agenda item. We are committed to learning from our collective experiences in implementing the strategic plan and to applying these lessons to ensuring an effective post-2020 global biodiversity framework. We appreciate the detailed analysis of the NBSAPs and national targets prepared by the Secretariat. We also note that the review is able to take into account a wide range of inputs, including scientific assessments such as GBO5 and the IPBES Global Assessment. It's vital that we take on board all of these findings on why there was insufficient global progress in the implementation of the Aichi targets and apply these findings to inform our future considerations. These findings will also be useful inputs for the development of improved mechanisms for reporting, assessment, and review of implementation. So, while New Zealand agrees with the overall elements of the draft decision, that national strategies, action plans, and targets have overall not been well aligned with the scope and ambition of the Aichi biodiversity targets, as was needed, we also think it will be important to capture other critical findings on the specific challenges we faced in implementation, including as identified by GBO5 and the IPBES Global Assessment. We therefore propose 3 additional elements are included in the draft decision. One paragraph welcoming the wide range of inputs to the review, including the recent GBO5 and IPBES Global Assessments. One paragraph expressing deep concern that these assessments indicate that none of the Aichi targets will be met, and one welcoming the specific lessons, as others had mentioned, identified by GBO5 for the development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and in the implementation of the Convention more generally. And then we could list these lessons out. So, for example, some really key lessons identified by GBO5 include the need for still greater efforts to address the direct and indirect drivers of biodiversity loss, and the need to strengthen national biodiversity strategies and action plans and associated planning processes. Including these wider lessons learned in our review findings, including as informed by the recent global assessments, will help to ensure that we have a clear understanding of the issues we're trying to address as we look to improve our implementation in the future, including under the post-2020 framework. New Zealand will submit these comments to the Secretariat in written form. Thank you.
Thank you, New Zealand. I now give the floor to Brazil, followed by Indonesia and Thailand. Brazil, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It is a pleasure to see you again. Many thanks for convening this informal meeting and maintaining the momentum. I will present some preliminary comments on behalf of Brazil on this agenda item, and our official position will be presented at the formal face-to-face meeting. Brazil understands that taking stock of the major challenges faced by parties in the implementation of the Convention and in its strategic plan is an essential step to achieve a balanced and realistic post-2020 global biodiversity framework. We must reflect on why national targets and commitments set by parties have been insufficient to reach the level of ambition set out in the IT targets. Firstly, Brazil believes the document SBI-3/2 should address the urgent need to provide additional resources to developing countries, exchange best practice, and increase technology transfer as well. The lack of adequate means of implementation has been a major obstacle for developing countries in the implementation of the Convention and its strategic plan. We must consider the conclusions of the GBO5 on IT Target 20 and SBI's expert panel on resource mobilization. Both documents have demonstrated biodiversity funding has been concentrated mainly on domestic sources. Therefore, we cannot disregard the poor implementation of Article 20 of the Convention, in line with the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. Secondly, the lack of simple, suitable, and measurable indicators since the early stages of the implementation of the strategic plan has clearly undermined our capacity to measure progress. In addition, adequate indicators on resource mobilization and means of implementation could have provided a valuable framework to identify capacity gaps, develop targeted capacity building initiatives, and support especially developing countries. Finally, delays in submitting national reports and national biodiversity strategies and action plans are an important reminder on the reporting and monitoring burden placed on developing countries, which face additional difficulties in gathering accurate data to properly prepare these documents. Thus, future options for enhancing reporting and monitoring must consider flexible approaches and take into account different national circumstances and capabilities. Possible reporting and monitoring frameworks must be carefully designed not to divert resources away from priority areas. We appreciate this opportunity to share our preliminary views, and we look forward to contributing to further discussions on this topic. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Brazil. I now give the floor to Indonesia, followed by Thailand and China. Indonesia, you have the floor.
Madam Chair, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Indonesia will make its statement first, and then allow me to thereafter deliver the ASEAN regional statement. For that, first, Indonesia appreciates all states and international organizations who have been trying hard to support the achievement of the Action Target 2011-2020 in order to reach the Vision 2050, living in harmony with nature. In line with this global action, Indonesia has developed 22 targets in the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action. We are glad to inform you that most of the target has been achieved and some of the target is on track to achieve. This includes but not limited to the protection of the terrestrial and marine area, increasing the population of the priority species, and develop of suitable regulation regarding the access and benefit sharing following the ratification by government Indonesia in 2019 in Nagoya. The participation also increased in traditional people and gender restoration ecosystem, as well as the sustainable use of environmental services. In terms of the financial, Indonesia glad to inform you that we have been developed the economic instrument and public agency for environment fund in Indonesia start in 2019. Next, Indonesia is pleased to deliver the regional statement on behalf of the 10 ASEAN member states that comprise of Association of Southeast Asian Nations or the ASEAN. The ASEAN region welcomes the discussion on this agenda item, which will enable the CBD parties and its partners gain valuable insight on the effectively implementing the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. In October 2020, an assessment report facilitated by ASEAN Center for Biodiversity indicates that Aichi Target 17 has been fully met in this region. Substantial progress toward the achievement of the Aichi Target 3 on incentive and 4 on sustainable production and consumption, Aichi Target 7 on sustainable aquaculture and forestry, 16 on the Nagoya Protocol and 19 on knowledge, as well as the 20 on mobilization of financial resources have been reported. Indeed, lessons learned from the implementing Aichi Target in the ASEAN region are rich results in guiding the implementation of the proposed 2030 action target under the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Such lessons indicate the following. First, the need of increased effort in the communication biodiversity conservation beyond awareness, such as transformative behavior change, result in socially mobilized site-level implementation. Second, the need for a more integrative and complementary approach to achieve the 2030 action target. Third, the need of the consistently recognize the value of the data and process information toward evidence-based and future process strategies. Finally, the need to take into account the driver of the biodiversity loss in flux and have been inherent in the current state of our environment. Moreover, initial findings of the ASEAN Biodiversity Outlook 3 indicate that ASEAN region has intensified their action in fulfilling the objective of the CBD and were notably more creative and innovative in the approach, particularly in the design and execution of the policy, projects, and programs. Nevertheless, this tremendous effort by ASEAN member states will come more focused and deliberate cross-sectoral collaboration for immediate and scale up the ASEAN effort in improving the qualities of environment, biodiversity conservation, as well as quick response to address the drivers of biodiversity loss in the ASEAN region. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Indonesia, also speaking on behalf of ASEAN countries. I now give the floor to Thailand, followed by China and Cambodia. So Thailand, please have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Although this is an informal meeting, we believe that it had a very important role in developing the work for the formal session and in keeping the momentum toward COP15. Thailand encouraged parties that have not to accomplish to develop their national biodiversity strategic and action plan and set national targets according to the implementation guidelines in line with the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework based on their national capacity and circumstance. We also encourage parties to strengthen their effort to develop knowledge, raise awareness on the importance and value of biodiversity and ecosystem services, building upon evidence-based scientific information and applicable to innovative biotechnology such as the development of communication strategic plan, promotion of public participation at all levels that will lead to behavioral change and practice in support of the adopted target. Thailand requested the CBD Secretariat to to provide technical implementation and financial resources to support the implementation of national action plans, including access to financial budget from related potential funds. Finally, Thailand believes that the high level of ambition are necessary if we want to achieve the 2015 vision and goals defined in the post-20 framework. This will involve a precise wording of the goal and targets, as well as setting the necessary level of science-based numerical elements. We will submit our statement in writing to the Secretariat through the CBD online application. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Thailand. I will now give the floor to China, followed by Cambodia, and after that I will take a 15-minute break. But before I give the floor to China, I will ask Cambodia if you could please activate your microphone. It's not done yet, so you are prepared. But I now give the floor to China, followed by Cambodia. China, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me? 能听到。Thank you, Madam Chair. We'll thank the Secretariat for preparing the documents. GBO5 shows that only 5 of the 20 Aichi targets partially achieved globally. Trend of biodiversity loss has not been curbed. 2020-2021 biodiversity strategic plan tells us that in order to make post-2020 framework to succeed, it is necessary to develop ambitious and realistic global goals and targets, and ensure that parties are able to develop national goals, update in a timely manner their goals and targets.
China, are you with us?
Perhaps we go to Cambodia and come back to China after the break.
Okay, I will do that. So Cambodia, if you will have the floor and then we'll have a break. Cambodia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Royal Government of Cambodia has made remarkable progress in the implementation of the Global Strategic Plan, especially in the regarding to target 11, 14, and 15. These achievements are very well stated in our 6th National Report. Based on the 17% of the terrestrial and inland water area and 10% of the coastal and marine area, Cambodia is achieving in establishment of PA system through the country covering more than 41% for the
I think we also have lost Cambodia, a connection to Cambodia. Secretariat, do you think it will be?
The government pay even more attention to promote the carbon stock through National Red Plus program and Biofin project, Madam Chair. The 5th edition of the Global Biodiversity Outlook provides the latest global summary of progress toward the biodiversity target. It draws conclusions relevant to the further implementation of the convention based on information about the steps taken in country to support biodiversity conservation, sustainable use, and access of benefit sharing.
Cambodia.
Many encouraging success stories and highlights.
Sorry to interrupt you, but maybe could you just speak a little slower, because the interpreters has asked me they want to have it a bit slower. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, let me start from the fifth edition of the Global Biodiversity Provide the latter global summary of progress toward the biodiversity target. It draws conclusions relevant to the further implementation of the convention based on the information about the steps taken in country to support biodiversity conservation, sustainable use, and access and benefit sharing. Many encouraging success stories are highlighted in the document to showcase national achievement. In this regard, Cambodia National Report have highlighted way and mean country could use to take progress toward the achievement or achieve biodiversity targets 6, 10, and 19, although not all of them were not achieved at the global level. GBO5 acknowledged the success of Cambodia community forest fishery reform and implied that such reform could consider among the effective action to reach achieve target 6 and SDG 14.4. For the inland and marine community fishery, Cambodia established involving in 2017 more than 330,000 people, 35% of whom were women, as well as the delegation of right to fisher so that they can appropriately and sustainably manage their own fishery area. Achieve Target 10 in line with SDG 14.1 and 14.3 has not been achieved by 2020 at the global level. As GBO5 highlight the positive action taken by Cambodia to promote and recover coral reef through the establishment of the 50-hectare Marine National Park in 2018, in line with its target to have 840 hectares of coral reef under some form of sustainable management. Achieve Target 19 on the generation, sharing and assessment of knowledge and data on biodiversity were only partially achieved at the global level. GBO5 highlight the effort that Cambodia is doing in promoting the synergistic implementation of the Rio Convention, including by gathering on its clearinghouse mechanism information and data are relevant to the 3 Rio Convention. Finally, Madam Chair, Cambodia take note the conclusion and support the suggest recommendation in document CBD/SBI-3/2, which requested for the COP15 to consider adoption of any effective strategic mechanism for resource mobilization to further implementation of not yet achieved target, as well as the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Cambodia. Colleagues, we'll now take a 50 minutes break, and after the break, we'll continue with China. Please retain your connection during the break. There is no need to log off. And for those who have not done that yet, I will also remind you to upload your statements. We will meet again at 8:55 Montreal time. That is 50 minutes break. So we convene at 8:55 Montreal time, and we'll continue with our agenda item.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, dear participants. This recorded video will show you how to upload your statements to the CBD website and how to request the floor on the virtual meeting platform. There are 2 options to upload your statements to the CBD website. First of all, in your Priority Pass email that you have received, you should see a link like this one here with your Priority Pass code written. The second option is by going to the meeting document page. Let us see what happens when I click on this link. We would land on this page. As you can see, the code is already entered And here you would find your own code. There is an option that you can click if you want this code to remain for the next time you rejoin this page. You have to choose a file to upload. We kindly ask you to write your party name, the session, and the agenda item. The content of the file should look like this. Similarly, you would show your party, your organization information. Eventually, if there is a revision, you would write as well the informal session of today and the agenda item on top of your document. Thank you very much. This would help us a lot. So once you have chosen your file, you have to choose the agenda item. In this case, it was capacity building, agenda item number 7. If this is a regional statement, you would click this box and choose your region. Then you choose your language. Finally, here, you would give the option to let us publish this information on the CBD website, or to refuse, and we will not publish this information on the CBD website. We recommend you to choose yes, but in some cases, you might want to choose no. And then you submit this document. I was mentioning a second option to upload the documents. For this, you would go to the CBD homepage. There you see the first carousel option is our session of today. Then you would choose the SBI-3 session of today. On the page, you choose Upload Statements. You're familiar with this window that is the same as before, except that this time, the priority passcode is not written there. In the second part of the presentation, I will show you how the Interactio platform works. In the middle of the screen on top, you have the selection button to select the language you want to hear. In our case here, during the presentation, I only have 2 options, but in your case, you will see several other options. On the bottom left of your screen, you have 3 little icons. The first one with a star, this means when you select it, you will see the speaker in front of you. The video will be bigger than the others. The second option with the little pin is the Secretariat can pin a few video channels, and in this case they would show bigger than the others on your screen. And finally, third option, all the video channels will show the same on your screen. You can play with those options during the upcoming session, and you will see the one you prefer. Let me now show you how to raise your hand. To do this, you would click on the raise hand button at the bottom here. When you click that button, it becomes yellow. This means you are in the queue, and the operator or the chairperson can give you the floor. When the chairperson gives you the floor, you then see the two buttons here, microphone and camera, becoming red. This means you are now live. Speak up, because it needs a little bit of sound from your end so that your video comes up on the screen. You are now ready to speak. Some last remarks. Please ensure that you have the most up-to-date version of Google Chrome. Please ensure as well that your microphone and camera have been selected. They show red if they have been selected. If they are not selected, they show gray like this here. During your intervention, if there are connectivity issues, your camera may be turned off by the operator to improve the quality of your sound streaming. This ends our presentation of today. Thank you very much for your attention. We stay at your disposal if you need more information or if you have questions. Thank you very much.
China, you had the floor.
谢谢主席女士，我将继。
I will continue my statement. The implementation experience of the 2011-2020 Biodiversity Strategic Plan tells us that in order to make the post-20 GBF a success, it is necessary to develop ambitious and realistic global goals, but also to ensure that all parties are able to update or revise their NBSAPs and develop their national goals in a timely manner after the adoption of GBF, as well as have the capacity to implement and report the progress. Therefore, strengthening capacity building is necessary to provide adequate technical and financial support in a timely manner. And all stakeholders are also important participants in the post-2020 GBF. So we welcome all stakeholders, including women, to take voluntary commitment and actions in the framework development and implementation. China firmly supports the multilateral governance system for biodiversity. China has always strictly fulfilled the obligation of the CBD, and we submitted a national report in time with high quality and actively implement the 2010 Aichi target and made positive progress. We believe that the framework should be both ambitious and realistic, reflect in a balanced manner the three CBD objectives, and the means of implementation and the enabling conditions under the GBF must be strengthened to enhance support for the developing countries in terms of resource mobilization and capacity building. China looks forward to a full discussion with all parties through an open, transparent, and party-driven process, and calls on all parties to move in the same direction and expand consensus for a more just and equitable post-2020 GBF. So we hope that under the leadership of the chair and the co-chair of Substar, the SBI, and the WG 2020, and based on the experience and the lessons learned, a package and a balanced deal on the goals and the target and the transparency and all the elements of the post-2020 in a balanced manner will be reached. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, China. I would now like to give the floor to Norway, followed by Costa Rica and South Africa. Norway, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The need to strengthen implementation should be at the center of discussion leading up to Kunming. This is a vital message underlined by GBO5, and that resonates well with this agenda item. While there has been encouraging progress towards elements of the Aichi targets, progress on the whole has been limited. National targets and commitments set by parties through national biodiversity strategies and action plans, NBSAPs, are collectively not corresponding with the level of ambition set out in the Aichi targets. Also, indigenous peoples and local communities, traditional knowledge and customary sustainable use are not adequately reflected in the implementation. We have to change this. SBI will play an important role in providing input to the open-ended working group for the development of a strengthened implementation mechanism post-2020 under agenda item 11. Reviewing progress towards the goals and targets of the Global Biodiversity Framework on a regular basis with the aim of increased efforts and actions is key for a successful implementation. However, limiting the review of progress to one agenda item at COP will not bring about the change we need. At the moment, there is no real expectation that parties will increase and adjust measures necessary to enhance implementation following the review. This needs to change. We suggest a stronger role for SBI in the review and follow-up of the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework and the Convention post-2020. The SBI should periodically take stock of the implementation of the GBF to assess the collective progress towards the goals and targets through a global biodiversity stocktake. The global biodiversity stocktake should be comprehensive and facilitative, considering all objectives of the CBD and the means of implementation and support. The stocktake should be based on latest IPBES reports, best available science, and a compilation of national reports. The outcome of the global biodiversity stocktake should inform the next round of revision of MBSAPs, creating a feedback loop of information and action where parties gradually improve their efforts, recognizing that parties' starting points and capabilities differ. We underline the importance of involving Indigenous peoples and local communities in decision-making processes and in the development of indicators for the post-2020 framework. We also encourage parties to put measures in place to enhance awareness and understanding of gender and biodiversity linkages. It is not only biodiversity that will be suffering if the implementation post-2020 does not significantly improve. This will also undermine other goals such as the temperature goal in the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Norway. I would now like to give the floor to Costa Rica, followed by South Africa and Uganda. Costa Rica, you have the floor.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the Secretariat and the Bureau of the SBI for these documents. For our country, it's very important to highlight some key aspects so that we can have high-level ambition in the language expressed in the decisions. We all have to make an effort to ensure that the strategic biodiversity actions are attained in a significant way and reflected in sectorial policies. Scientific evidence is key here. We have to act urgently and holistically, and we have to go towards a transformative change, changing the production and consumption patterns, and we have to give priority to protection of nature. We have to increase our ambitions at a national and international level and put nature on the path to recovery so that we can meet our commitments, including the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. At the same time, we need to have an appropriate, adequate mechanism that really aligns the actions and priorities of our global strategic planning together with the actions that are taking place at a national level. That is essential in order to revert the loss of biodiversity. Costa Rica considers that efforts have to be made in the proposed recommendations in the document CBD/SBI/3/2 so that we can fulfill this important task as an international community in order to conserve biodiversity. In this respect, we consider that the language of the recommendations should be stronger and more tangible and more aggressive, and in particular more ambitious, so we can actually attain this achievement at an international and national level. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Costa Rica. I now give the floor to South Africa, followed by Uganda and UK. South Africa, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Thanks. South Africa supports the statement made by the Democratic Republic of Congo on behalf of the Africa Group. Chair, South Africa notes the conclusion on the review of progress articulated in the document under review and the associated addendums. In line with the text of Article 6 of the Convention, the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plans is the principal planning tool for the implementation of the Convention at a national level, and therefore remains the basis for the national plans to implement the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. However, we need to note that most NBSAPs that were revised may still be valid beyond 2020. As a result, This presents a challenge given the requisite and elaborate national processes to revise the NBSEPs. Chair, South Africa is also deeply concerned that most national targets and commitments that were set by parties through the NBSEPs were collectively not commensurate with the level of ambition set out in the Aichi targets, and thus greatly limited the ability to achieve the 2011 to 2020 strategic plan. Given the foregoing, we'd like to draw our attention to paragraph 22 of document CBD SBI-3/2, which outlines a number of lessons that have been identified in relation to NBSEPs, national reports, capacity building, resource mobilization, and the review of implementation of the convention for the period of the strategic plan for biodiversity from 2011 to 2020. Noting the level of ambition and to circumvent the previous trajectory, we need to take into account those lessons in order to ensure that our national planning is aligned with ambitions of the post-2020 GBF. Therefore, the success of the GBF will depend greatly on the ambitious NBSEPs anchored on the post-2020 GBF targets, supported by strong capacity building actions and commensurate resources that match the level of ambition. Chair, South Africa also notes with concern the slow progress towards implementation of the 2015 to 2020 Gender Plan of Action, as well as progress on the consideration of indigenous people and local communities in the implementation of the convention and associated NBSEPs. To achieve greater impact on the involvement of women, youth, and IPLCs, we also need to ensure that the GBF reflects the three objectives of the convention in a balanced manner. It is in this context, and noting the vital role that women, youth, and IPLCs play in managing biological resources and are disproportionately affected by the loss of biodiversity and ecosystem services, South Africa will support a new gender plan of action with smart targets and indicators that can be disaggregated into national targets in order to increase a gender-responsive implementation of the GBF at national level. Furthermore, this can also be complemented by designating a national focal point for gender and biodiversity to strengthen parties' capacity on this important issue. Chair, finally, South Africa notes that capacity building provided to parties and IPLCs has contributed towards the implementation of Aichi Target 18, and this is a valuable lesson for consideration under the post-2020 GBF. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, South Africa. I will now give the floor to Uganda, followed by UK and Switzerland. Uganda, you have the floor. Uganda?
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear
Yes.
you loud and clear.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Uganda emphasizes that the NBSAP is still a good and relevant tool that should be used in the post-2020 global framework for planning, implementation, and review processes based on the goals, indicators, targets at global and national level. Besides, Uganda reiterates that the NBSAP review reporting processes should include global analysis of progress on targets, achievements, on milestones, goals, open-ended forums for review of national implementation, to share lessons learned, best practices, and voluntary peer review of national implementation by experts and other parties based on agreed objectives and indicators. Notably, the national report focuses on key objectives, targets, key progress that include but not limited to the following: integrating biodiversity values into the National Development Plan or framework, facilitating and building capacity for research, monitoring and information management, reducing and managing negative impacts while and enhancing positive impacts on biodiversity. Uganda has also made progress in reducing extinction of non-threatened species, promoting sustainable use, equitable sharing of costs and benefits of biodiversity, enhancing public education on biodiversity issues among various stakeholders, enhancing modern biotechnology for socio-economic development with adequate safety measures for human health and environment, promoting innovation and sustainable funding mechanisms to support the NBSAP implementation. In conclusion, Chair, Uganda supports the suggested recommendations and would like to propose some additional recommendations also, as well as the efforts by some parties in the implementation of the Gender Action Plan, involvement of the IPLCs in the review, implementation of the National Biodiversity Strategy Action Plans. Finally, Uganda calls for enhanced resource mobilization, institutional capacity building, development, technology transfer, cooperation, science policy interface in the implementation of the NBSAP. In this regard, Uganda aligns itself with the African groups that supports the goals that will enhance means of implementation and the available in order to achieve all the goals and targets of the post-2020 GBF framework. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Uganda. I will now give the floor to UK, followed by Switzerland and Bosnia and Herzegovina. UK, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is important that we learn from our collective experience implementing the Aichi biodiversity targets and the strategic plan 2011-2020. We therefore support the proposed recommendation. The documents contain important lessons learned that we should draw from to help us achieve ambitious targets by strengthening planning, reporting, and review mechanisms. For example, in NBSAPs, there has been a disparity between the scope and ambition expressed in relation to the Aichi biodiversity targets, resulting in the national targets not collectively adding up to the ambition that was agreed at COP10. In addition, the collective assessment of national level targets and actions contained in NBSAPs has been hampered by the varied formats, information, and timings of their submission. These problems could be addressed by responding to the GBF as soon as possible through updating the entire NBSAPs or a part of it, which clearly presents each party's contributions, also referred to as commitments, to meeting the global goals and targets in a consistent manner. This could take the form of an annex to NBSAPs to facilitate comparability, clarity, and aggregation. At the same time, NBSAPs can and should remain flexible to reflect specific national circumstances. Furthermore, we think that by keeping the national report format simple and focused on information needed to assess the global progress, national reports will be easier to compile, less resource intensive, and therefore more likely to be submitted on time. This would also ensure timely provision of information needed for the global review of implementation, which will provide feedback to parties whether their collective implementation efforts are sufficient to meet the global goals and targets. We agree in particular with the message on the need for more effective, comprehensive, and actionable reviews of implementation. We should all try to make the complex task of review of our ambition and implementation easier by making explicit links between our national ambitions and global goals and targets. Finally, we recognize the importance of gender considerations and IPLCs and traditional knowledge in successful implementation of the GBF. It is essential that we give these due consideration in the drafting of the new framework, as well as when developing and implementing our plans and at the reporting stage. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, UK. I will now give the floor to Switzerland, followed by Bosnia-Herzegovina and Argentina. Switzerland, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Despite the ongoing negotiation process for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, Switzerland continues to consider the Strategic Plan 2011 to 2020 to be a valuable foundation for our internationally coordinated policy measures to fight the ongoing decline of biodiversity. At the same time, we are concerned that at the end of the timeframe for the plan to 2020, we are still too far away from the targets we commonly set. It goes without saying that Switzerland continues to pursue its national biodiversity strategy and to implement its action plan. And we expect the other parties not to stop their engagement and actions until the new framework will be adopted. In our view, a robust and transparent review of progress is essential to take informed decisions both for implementing the outgoing strategic plan as well as for the definition of the new framework and its targets. The factual analysis by the Secretariat on where parties stand regarding updating their NBSAPs and in submitting national reports is useful, and it should serve as an incentive to actively participate in the implementation of our common strategy. The IPES Global Assessment of 2019 clearly showed that the framework adopted more than 10 years ago in Nagoya did not deliver what is needed. We should draw on the lessons learned during the first 2 decades of this century. In this context, Switzerland regrets that the Global Biodiversity Outlook 5 was only published after the negotiations for the post-2020 framework have already started. Madam Chair, Switzerland is of the view that we should significantly enhance and strengthen the review and reporting mechanism in the post-2020 framework to allow detecting problems and challenges with regard to implementation, but also to allow learning from each other and help and stimulate improvement of action by parties. Therefore, the topic of this agenda item should be significantly strengthened under the post-2020 framework, and we will make concrete proposals under agenda item 9. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Switzerland. I will now give the floor to Bosnia-Herzegovina, followed by Argentina and Canada. Bosnia-Herzegovina, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Bosnia and Herzegovina would like to thank the Secretariat for documents prepared on this agenda item. As a country with economy in transition, which relies on international support in the implementation of the Convention at the national level, we would like to take this opportunity to thank all organizations and parties who have assisted others in reviewing national strategies and preparing national reports under the Convention. Although we believe that the analysis in the prepared review quite realistically shows the process that we have gone through collectively in the past 10 years, we want to emphasize that national circumstances and conditions should be, in the coming period, more seriously analyzed in the context of reviewing the progress. Just for example, we believe that an increasing number of stakeholders in strategic planning processes for biodiversity should be given more importance. We also believe that the lessons learned in the past 10 years presented here as a conclusion in document 3/2 are of great importance as a stepping stone to long-term collective learning in the implementation processes of the Convention. Therefore, we suggest that, after their careful consideration under Agenda Item 9, the lessons learned with a slight text change that highlights the importance of timely support to be referred to as an annex to the SBI-3 recommendations to the COP15. We also hope that submission of lessons learned could become a regular practice at the end of each policy cycle. We will submit this written proposal to the Secretariat. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Bosnia and Herzegovina. And I will now continue with Argentina, followed by Canada. Argentina, you have the floor.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
On this agenda item, we would like to make the following comments on the documents and the proposed recommendation. Argentina highlights that the majority of the NBSAPs prepared and reviewed since the 10th meeting of the COP contain targets related to the HA biodiversity targets, and that is the case for Argentina. At the same time, we share the concern that the national and regional targets that have been adopted have not collectively attained the level of global ambition established in the HA biodiversity targets. However, we believe that this is not due to the low ambition of the NBSAPs related to the HA targets. The fact that the global ambition has not been collectively attained is mainly due to a lack of financial resources, lack of capacity and technology for implementation, in particular in developing countries. We consider that remarking that the strategies were not ambitious enough on an individual basis seems to then forget that the HA targets were adopted in Decision 10/2 as a voluntary and flexible framework in line with national priorities and capacities and their biodiversity situation and trends within each country, and also in particular because of the resources provided through the strategy for resource mobilization. In this respect, we would like to highlight that all the progress made represents an effort in terms of the selection and adaptation of targets undertaken by the parties, depending on their policies, needs, and implementation and financial capacities that were made available. Therefore, from our point of view, this is the lesson that we should learn when developing the global biodiversity framework. In order to have more success, it's not necessary to increase the ambition of conservation targets and sustainable use targets. Rather, we need to increase the provision of resources so that we can put into practice the agreement set out in the Convention. To conclude, we are committed to ensuring that the experience of the past decade is completely taken into account in the post-2020 framework in order to rise to the challenge halting biodiversity loss. Therefore, thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Argentina. And I have one more party on my list, and it's Canada. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Canada would like to welcome the information contained in the document and its addendum as valuable reference for parties and the co-chairs of the open-ended working group of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework to identify additional measures to accelerate efforts and to address gaps in implementation. As such, Canada would suggest that all 4 addendums could instead be included as annexes to the main document or clearly being referenced in the draft recommendation by using footnotes. Furthermore, Canada is confused with regards to footnote number 13 of the document included in recommendation 1 that refers to the document on the review effectiveness of the Cartagena Protocol and rather as opposed to this document right now. That is SBI-3/3 rather than SBI-2/3/2. Canada would seek some clarification from the Secretariat on this regards. While Canada recognizes the continued efforts within the CBD to advance gender equality, Canada is deeply concerned that our collective efforts on these issues are not commensurate with the scope and ambition that is needed. Gender equality is a key element of the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, as well as a key international priority for Canada. As such, Canada strongly advocates for maintaining a focus on and further advancing gender equality and mainstreaming of gender consideration into biodiversity planning and actions going forward. Finally, Canada recognizes the critical role of Indigenous peoples and local communities as stewards of biodiversity and nature and its sustainable use, and is committed to supporting the full and effective participation of Indigenous peoples and local communities in the implementation of the CBD. While Canada recognizes the important progress that has been made by parties as noted through the 6th National Report Document Addendum 4, Canada is deeply concerned that this remains highly insufficient to achieve the objectives set under Aichi Target 18. Canada would emphasize the need for parties to continue to take concrete actions to advance progress towards the full and effective participation of Indigenous peoples and local communities in the context of the post-2020 GBF and beyond. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Canada. I see no more requests from parties for the floor. So we'll move to interventions from, if there are any non-parties who would like to have the floor. No, I see no requests from the non-parties, and then I would like to open the floor for interventions by representatives of a major groups of stakeholders. Each statement should not exceed 5 minutes. And I would like to start on behalf of IPLC's Viviana Figueroa from RMIB LAC. IPLC, you have the floor.
Gracias, señora presidenta. Hablo en nombre de...
Madam Chair, I'm speaking on behalf of the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity and the IWBN. The IIFB welcomes the analysis produced to review progress with HE Target 18 and also in the Gender Plan of Action produced by the Secretariat. The IAFB thanks the parties who have included participation of Indigenous peoples in the development of their 6th national reports. However, the IAFB is concerned that there's only a few parties that have mentioned the commitment and the full and effective participation of Indigenous peoples in the development and implementation of the NBSAPs. Mainly, the IFB is concerned that the parties have not used or implemented the 4 traditional knowledge indicators that were adopted in the convention, and they have not included qualitative information to measure progress made. Unfortunately, Target 18 for biodiversity has not been attained. At the same time, the IFFB expresses its deep concern about the low implementation of the Gender Plan of Action, the fact that there's very little information on this. In fact, there's only 5.5% of the parties that have referred to this plan in their 6th national reports. During this decade with the G targets, the Indigenous peoples have made a big effort to protect biodiversity and thus have contributed to attaining the targets as recognised in the IPBES Global Assessment of Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. We would also like to thank the Secretariat and the donors who have contributed to the publication of the 2nd edition of the Local Biodiversity Outlook. This gives our opinions and contributions as Indigenous peoples to the implementation of the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011 to 2020. The LBO is a complementary report to GBO 5. The IFB invites the parties to consider in this report on the assessment of progress of the Strategic Plan 2011-2020. The lessons learned and progress on the attainment of Target 18 should be considered as the basis for negotiating the global biodiversity framework for the future targets on traditional knowledge. Developing the global framework offers an opportunity to enjoy the full potential of the Indigenous peoples and local communities as partners in implementing the Convention and ensuring protection of biodiversity. Thus, the IFFB recommends the addition of the following paragraphs. First of all, we think that there should be stronger wording for paragraph 6, in fact, recommendation 6, so that we further note with concern, in fact, that there's the full and effective participation of Indigenous peoples, and that this should be considered in the analysis, and we should undertake new actions to address the concerns mentioned about implementation of the new global biodiversity framework. Also, to encourage parties and governments to support Indigenous peoples for the organisation of national dialogue on the successes of the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity, in particular Target 18, also to request the Executive Secretary to organise with Indigenous peoples and an international dialogue on Target 18 progress, and also request the Executive Secretary to organise dialogue with Indigenous women on the new Gender Plan of Action. Finally, the IFP wishes to recall to all present that while we're waiting for the finalisation of the global framework, we still have the opportunity and obligation to step up our efforts in implementing the current strategic plan and HE targets. The parties, in collaboration with Indigenous peoples, can still and should take action in the remaining part of the year before the new framework is established. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
IPLC. And we continue on behalf of the women's organizations. It will be Anna Di Pangerazio from FRRN. Yes, you have the floor.
Yeah. Good morning. You can hear me, right?
I can hear you.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Happy International Women's Day to all. I am making this statement on behalf of the CBD Women Caucus. We welcome all documents prepared for this agenda item. We particularly welcome efforts in reviewing the implementation of the 2015-2020 Gender Plan of Action, which included the assessment of 126 national reports and 2 global surveys. Thanks to the Secretariat for their work and support in this regard. We are happy to have contributed to these discussions. And thanks to Ms. Rema and Ms. Teixeira for their remarks today. On Addendum 1, updating national biodiversity strategies and action plans and setting national targets, MBSAPs are the principal planning tools for the implementation of the CBD at the national level. It is definitely good news that since 1993, 97% of parties to the CBD have developed at least one MBSAP, and that as of early 2020, over 150 parties have revised them at least once. This includes the establishment of national and regional targets in relation to achieving the HE targets. But less than half of MBSAPs, 76 parties, make reference to gender or women's issues. This is still very low. On Addendum 2, progress in implementing the strategic plan, information from national reports, it is worrying to see that few of the national targets set by parties explicitly refer to taking into account the needs of women, indigenous peoples and local communities, and the poor and vulnerable when it comes to restoring and safeguarding ecosystems that provide essential services. On Addendum 3, progress in implementing the Gender Plan of Action. Though there seems to have been an enhanced understanding among parties of gender and biodiversity, the Gender Plan of Action was not fully implemented. We encourage parties to take reflection of the review of the GPA to address the gaps towards the development of the whole of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework to ensure that women and girls are recognized as key partners and right holders in its implementation. The CBD is the first Rio Convention to have adopted a gender plan of action, and going forward, we hope it will be strengthened in pursuit of gender mainstreaming in the implementation of the work of the Convention. A strong commitment is needed to put in place actions to address the gaps that have been identified in the review. Finally, on Addendum 4, progress towards Aichi Biodiversity Target 18, there has not been any measurable progress in the participation of IPLCs in the development and implementation of MBSATs. Only 10% of the 6 national reports mention their engagement in MBSATs processes. This needs to be addressed. This review is the last chance for the SBI to assess a series of relevant issues from the period 2011-2020. This assessment is consistent with alerts from GBO5 and IPBES. It is the opportunity to urgently take steps for a truly transformative action. Having these baselines should inform the deliberations of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, including all agenda items being put forward for the consideration of SBI-3. This is a reminder that we cannot go back to business as usual. We need change, a drastic one, and we need it now. Today, as we commemorate International Women's Day, let us all take this momentum to pave a more just, fair, and equitable framework for all. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, women. We'll now continue with the youth. On behalf of youth, it will be Afena Syarifa. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It will actually be Julian Locurlo addressing this specific statement. And I want to start by allowing me to talking frankly and directly, because it is always the same story time after time. We spend months and years discussing and agreeing on plans to get us out of this crisis. Once we agree on them, we come back 10 years later and find that we're back at where we started. The only difference is that today the situation is worse than before, and the time to act is even less. We're in the middle of the 6th mass extinction, losing species at a rate that is unprecedented as long as we humans have been on Earth, and we're already facing the terrifying outcomes of it. This is something we all agree on, but something we keep turning a deaf ear to is that the core of our unsustainable patterns is deeply rooted in systemic social inequalities and an unwillingness to question the systems of values and priorities behind our actions. We understand the incredibly complex challenges behind the implementation of the Aichi targets. We especially recognize the lack of adequate capacity, resources, and political support faced by many countries, and the limitations of our systems as well. We must persevere. We need true transformation, and this won't come without a resistance. With nothing less than life itself at stake, we need to do things drastically different. Because even with shiny new goals and plans, nothing changes when the systems through which we implement them stay the same. We believe that our national strategies moving forward must incorporate meaningful changes in the following areas, many of which are also pointed out in the second edition of the Local Biodiversity Outlooks. Firstly, we need change in our governance systems. Top-down strategies have marginalized less powerful actors from decision-making for far too long. Governance has been happening in silos, privileging economic growth over environmental health and social well-being. Our governance approaches must guarantee the respect for human rights, greater equity, well-being, sustainability, and resilience for all. Secondly, our economic systems. We're living through the dark consequences of an economic system that seeks infinite growth, yet depends on finite resources. We must embrace, support, and learn from the many diverse systems embodying local and customary sustainable use, small-scale production, well-guided technological innovation, and scaled-down consumption, providing multiple benefits to societies with less resources, as well as sharing those resources more equitably. Third, we need changes in our cultural systems. The role of culture in all of this is too massive to be ignored. Culture defines the way we relate to the world around us, but the prevailing culture is one of dominance over nature rather than being part of it. As a central strategy out of this social ecological crisis, we must celebrate, support, and foster the diverse cultures of sustainability that are in danger of being lost. Fourth, we need changes in our systems of subsidies and incentives and our resource mobilization strategies. Massive resources continue to be allocated to destructive activities like fossil fuels and extractives. We're still spending $500 billion every year for subsidies that are harmful to biodiversity, 10 times the funding that goes to biodiversity conservation and sustainable use. Harmful subsidies must be eliminated and reformed immediately, and substantially more resources must be mobilized and allocated to meet the objectives of the Convention. And lastly, in our educational systems, because we will continue to struggle with achieving the needed changes until we shape our societal values to being in line with living in harmony with nature. We find a key solution in education, in a transformative education system that fosters a society that understands our place in the web of life and stewards us towards a sustainable, peaceful, and equitable future. Reading the documents and being confronted with the lack of progress towards implementation is disheartening. We can help but feel not only angry or frustrated, but also utterly scared. an entire generation is anxious and fearful of the future that lies ahead of us. We're not just talking about somehow a blurry, distant future for your great grandkids anymore. This is happening now, today, to our generation and to your children. We implore you not to make us live through another 10 years of business as usual. With a heavy heart and with unbearable fear, but also with hope for a different trajectory, we thank you for the word, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Youth. I will now give the floor to, on behalf of the CBD Alliance, Suparna Lahiri from Global Forest Coalition. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This statement is on behalf of the CBD Alliance, which gathers a diverse range of views and proposals from civil society. Evidence shows that progress made in the CBD so far is not enough, which results in the continued destruction of our mother nature. The still timid efforts to address the root causes of biodiversity loss are greatly outweighed by policies that harm nature instead. For example, according to the Dasgupta review, perverse incentives that trigger biodiversity loss come to some 4 to 6 trillion US dollars annually. Parties have generally failed to adjust country legislation and incentives to the objectives of the CBD and its strategic plan 2010 to 2020. Budgets to the environment are only a fraction of what is spent on trade and support to the economy. And the overall sum of perverse incentives is at 5 to 10 times as high as that spent for biodiversity. Recent analysis has shown that the main obstacle to perverse incentive reform is the corporate capture of policy making. So as long as the very corporations that benefit from harmful subsidies play a dominant role in policy making, there is little chance for old or new biodiversity targets to be met. The failure of many parties to implement the commitments in the basic text of the CBD and the failure of other parties to hold them to account, as well as the failure to implement previous decisions of the CBD, is a fundamental problem. It means that the CBD is constantly creating new commitments for the future while failing to act on those already made. Gender mainstreaming remains something that is mainly discussed within the framework of the gender plane of action and is also not something that actually gets implemented. Many preparatory documents of the Secretariat continue to be partly or fully gender blind, and even if the role of women is mentioned, the analysis is prepared by the Secretariat lacks a sincere gender assessment of all the different aspects of biodiversity conservation. Meanwhile, the implementation of the IT targets has focused on low-hanging fruit like the designation of the conventional protected areas, but not on necessary management and additionality as a biodiversity conservation measure or equity and participation, with the consequence of unacceptable human rights violations. Other equally important targets such as IT Target 3 on removing perverse incentives, IT Target 7 on making agriculture, forestry and fisheries sustainable, or IT Target 8 on reducing pollution have been so insufficiently addressed that the situation is still getting worse instead of better. Also, the lack of implementation of Target 18, respecting traditional knowledge and practices of indigenous peoples and local communities, customary use of biological resources, and implementation of the convention with the full and effective participation of IPLCs indicates that the political will to conserve, restore, and halt biodiversity loss is still low. We remind parties that the postponement of the adoption of a post-2020 GBF is no excuse for inaction. Parties to the CBD have legal obligations still unmet as IT targets have not been achieved and should increase efforts to accomplish them and the objectives of the convention and the ultimate vision of living in harmony with nature. We would like to kindly remind parties of Decision 14/1, in which COP14 clearly calls parties to do exactly just that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, CBD Alliance. And that is my list of major groups. I will now open the floor for interventions from other observers. And before I open the floor, I recognize that there is a high interest by many observers to speak under each agenda item, and all may not be able to speak. And therefore, in the interest of time, I would like to share with you that I plan to take a balanced approach to inviting observers to speak throughout this week. The balance will be between IGO, NGO, UN within a balance, large and small organizations, equal numbers where possible from developed and developing countries. And I hope that as many as possible will be able to speak. But I will start with UNU and followed by Third World Network. So UNO, please go ahead. And I also have to remind you that all statements need to just 3 minutes statements, please. UNO, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The work of the United Nations University Institute for Advanced Study of Sustainability agrees with the findings of GBO5 that the implementation of the Gender Plan of Action and progress towards Aichi Target 18 has not been sufficient to date. Sorry. GBO5 has made it clear that none of the Aichi targets are likely to be achieved. In particular, we find that elements of the targets that would benefit most from integrated approaches are among those that require the most attention. An integrated approach to biodiversity conservation means accounting for the interests of all stakeholders and working towards holistic and sustainable ecosystems.
Hi,
Still,
I'm sorry.
much of the focus in policy negotiations.
I'm sorry, your connection is not clear, and so interpretation will need to stop. They cannot follow you.
Okay. I'll try turning off my camera.
Yes, try
to
take off your camera. And please try again.
All right. I'm not sure if you heard anything, but I'll try to start from the beginning and still try to finish. The work of the United Nations University. Okay, good. The work of the United Nations University Institute for the Advanced Study of Sustainability agrees with the findings of GBO5 that implementation of the Gender Plan of Action and progress towards Aichi Target 18 has not been sufficient to date. GBO5 has made it clear that none of the Aichi targets are likely to be achieved. In particular, we find that elements of the targets that would most benefit from integrated approaches are among those that require the most attention. An integrated approach to biodiversity conservation means accounting for the interests of all stakeholders and working towards holistic and sustainable ecosystems. Still, much of the focus in policy negotiations tends to be on sectoral approaches that have not been as effective to address the complexity of biodiversity. Obvious examples where an integrated approach is proven effective include coral conservation, where a ridge-to-reef approach across the landscape is needed to avoid runoff and pollution by excessive nutrients. In fact, an integrated landscape approach can improve effectiveness in almost all areas of conservation if we continue to treat issues separately. However, we will repeat the same failures of the past. Similarly, a major reason why progress has been too slow on gender and IPLC issues is because of the lack of a landscape perspective. The landscape perspective gives stakeholders connectivity between human activities and nature and contributes to promoting partnership among stakeholders. We urge the parties to learn this lesson and consider ways to incorporate integrated landscape approaches in future implementation of the convention so we can all realize living in harmony with nature. To help the parties, UNUIS is now developing a manual for incorporation of integrated landscape approaches into NBSAPs and related national policies. The manual is being developed in cooperation with the CBD Secretariat, and we intend to carry out capacity development projects for the parties based on its outcomes in the future. Thank you very much, Chair, and happy Women's Day to everybody.
Thank you very much, UNU. I will now go to Third World Network, followed by Comoros. So, Third World Network, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We are in unprecedented times, and the urgency to protect biodiversity and share the benefits equitably has never been greater. In the midst of this pandemic, we are faced with multiple challenges. Postponed face-to-face and formal negotiations of SBSTA 24, SBI-3, OEWG3, and COP15 have meant that work could not be concluded according to the original timelines. However, the pandemic must not be used as an excuse to avoid existing obligations. Instead, the focus and priority should be on, firstly, renewed commitment by parties to implement their legally binding obligations under the CBD on all three objectives in a balanced manner, including on the means of implementation. Second, achieving the goals of the strategic plan and the IG targets, which have not yet been met. Third, confronting and addressing the root causes of biodiversity loss. Fourth, supporting Indigenous peoples and local communities and women and protecting their rights in the efforts to protect biodiversity. And finally, strengthen national implementation of NBSAPs that is cognizant of all the above points. Many developing countries are struggling with multiple crises brought about by the pandemic. In the midst of all this, there are strong pressures to begin formal virtual negotiations for the post-2020 GBF. Formal virtual negotiations will disadvantage developing countries, which may face challenges in participating effectively and dynamically. They would be inequitable for many reasons, including the digital divide affecting internet connectivity and technical capability, limited capacity and resources, and other challenges for regional and other coordination. In addition, time zone differences may disproportionately disadvantage a particular region, while inclusivity and transparency in how decisions are made would also be impacted. We must not entrench further inequity into the post-2020 GBF. The pandemic must not be used as an excuse to avoid existing obligations while seeking to negotiate new obligations in an inequitable way, and that could result in unbalanced outcomes that do not significantly reflect or address developing countries' views and concerns. Much can still be done to address the biodiversity crisis, and many steps can still be taken virtually to advance the post-2020 GBF without convening formal virtual negotiations. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Third World Network. I now give the floor to Comoros. You have the floor. Comoros.
Allô? Allô?
Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Je crois que j'ai fait une mauvaise manipulation de...
That my finger slipped and I hit the button. I'm sorry. Hello. No, I was saying that I made a mistake with the system. I didn't want the floor. Thank you.
Okay, I understand that you don't, it was a mistake. Okay, I see no more requests for the floor. So, we have now reached the conclusion of our discussion on Item 3, Review of Progress in the Implementation of the Convention and the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity. And as previously explained, There will be no conference room papers stemming from this informal session. Together with the Secretariat, I will prepare a short procedure report on the informal session, noting parties and observers that have made interventions. We will reconvene tomorrow at 7 a.m. Montreal time. Start with agenda item 4. I would like to sincerely thank you all for your active participation in this informal session of SBI. We have had a highly productive start, and I look forward to continue our discussions tomorrow. We will reconvene tomorrow at 7 a.m. Montreal time, starting with agenda 4, item 4. The meeting is adjourned.